I always believed the worst truths were the ones whispered behind closed doors. But sometimes, the truth sits quietly in your own home, waiting for the right moment to tear everything apart. The day my doctor looked at me with that strange heaviness in her eyes, I felt something shift in my chest, like the world had paused just to let one secret breathe. And that secret belonged to my husband long before it ever reached me. That morning had started normally. I brewed coffee, packed his lunch, and smiled the same practiced smile I had worn for years. He rushed out the door with his usual line, "I'll tell you something tonight. Remind me." He had been saying that for weeks, maybe months. I never pressed him. Maybe I should have. Maybe the truth wouldn't have shattered me if it had come from him. But life has this cruel way of using strangers to deliver the words your loved ones never had the courage to say. By noon, I was sitting in the clinic, my fingers cold, my mind half somewhere else. A follow-up appointment, routine, nothing alarming. But then doctor. Elaine walked in slowly, carrying a folder like it weighed more than it should. I remember her sitting across from me, inhaling as if she needed strength to speak. And in that breath, I felt the first crack forming, sharp and silent. "Before I explain anything," she said softly, "I need you to know that none of this is your fault." My heart started pounding so loudly that her words almost blurred. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. But the truth doesn't wait for readiness. She placed the papers in front of me, test results, timelines, clinical notes, my name written neatly on the top, my world falling apart underneath it. I blinked at the words but couldn't absorb them, couldn't accept the direction they were pointing. "You were exposed months ago," she added. "Long before this checkup." Months ago. Long before. The words echoed like footsteps walking backward into my past. I felt my throat tighten, my mind spinning through memories, arguments, late-night phone calls, unexplained absences, sudden showers the moment he returned home. All the little things I ignored because marriage teaches you to overlook the noise. But this wasn't noise. This was truth clothed in medical language, sterile and undeniable. I stared at her, unable to breathe. "You're saying my husband?" She didn't answer immediately. Doctors rarely confirm what they don't want to say out loud. Instead, she gently pushed the report toward me. A single highlighted line felt like it screamed. "He should have told you," she said finally. "You deserved to hear it from him." Those words broke me more than the diagnosis itself. Because somewhere inside me, I already knew. I had known for months, maybe even years. The late-night messages he guarded like fragile secrets. The sudden distance that grew between us without warning. The moments he looked at me like he was present but already gone. But knowing quietly and hearing it out loud are two different kinds of pain. I closed my eyes, trying not to fall apart in front of her. The room felt too bright, too clean for something so ugly. The walls seemed to echo with everything he never said, every truth he buried. "He said he needed to talk to me," I whispered. "He said he'd tell me soon." Dr. Elaine placed a comforting hand on mine. Sometimes people wait until it's too late. The drive home felt like floating through someone else's life. I couldn't feel my hands on the steering wheel. I couldn't hear the radio. I couldn't remember the turns. My mind replayed every moment my husband had looked me in the eyes and lied not with words, but with silence. When I finally reached home, the house felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to a stranger who shared my memories but not my heart. His shoes were by the door, his jacket on the chair, his scent still lingering in the hallway. All the signs of a man who lived here. Yet none of it felt real. I sat on the edge of the bed we once shared, clutching the papers like they were weapons. Maybe they were. Not because of what they revealed, but because of what they confirmed. I had been living beside a man who carried a truth so heavy, he chose to let me discover it from someone else. That betrayal cut deeper than anything I had imagined. But the part that haunted me most wasn't the diagnosis. It was the final line on the last page of the report, one that Dr. Elaine didn't read out loud, maybe because she knew it would destroy me. A line written in his handwriting, a note he had signed months ago, a note that proved he knew everything long before I did. And he still walked out that morning saying, "Remind me tonight." Tonight wasn't going to save anything now. The hours after discovering the truth moved strangely, like time had loosened its grip on everything familiar. I sat in the quiet house, the doctor's words echoing inside me, refusing to settle. Every corner of the room felt different now, as if the truth had seeped into the walls, rearranging the life I thought I understood. I kept looking at the doorway, half expecting him to walk in, half praying he wouldn't, unsure which would hurt more. The papers rested beside me on the bed, their edges bent from how tightly I had held them. I read the note again, the one he had signed months ago. His handwriting was calm, steady, almost casual, like he was signing for a package, not acknowledging something capable of breaking a marriage. It shocked me how normal his signature looked beneath such heavy words. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't stumbled. He had known. He had moved through life like nothing was wrong while letting me live in ignorance. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to collapse. But mostly, I felt this hollow ache that kept stretching deeper every time I remembered his voice saying, "I'll tell you soon." Soon had turned into too late. As evening settled, the light outside dimmed, making shadows gather across the room. I waited for him, but not in the way a wife waits for her husband. I waited like someone bracing for a storm already overhead. I kept rehearsing what I would say, but every sentence felt too small for the betrayal burning inside me. How do you confront a man who let a doctor speak in his place? How do you demand honesty from someone who carried silence like armor? When his car finally pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. I could hear his footsteps approaching, steady and familiar. The door opened, and he walked in like it was any other day. He hung his keys, loosened his collar, and called my name. His voice sounded normal, untouched by the weight he had placed on my heart. "I'm home," he said. "You okay? You look tired." Tired. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood up and held the papers in front of me. His eyes flickered for a moment, a flash of recognition followed by something heavier. Fear, guilt, or maybe both. He didn't reach for them. He didn't step closer. He just stared, frozen in a silence he had created long before this moment. "You knew," I said quietly. "All this time, you knew." He swallowed, his Adam's apple trembling. "I wanted to tell you. I was going to. You just didn't," I cut in. "You waited until someone else had to say it for you." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing like he was searching for excuses scattered on the floor. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought maybe it wasn't serious. I thought maybe—" "You thought wrong," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You thought of yourself. Not me." He stopped moving, his shoulders dropping. "I made a mistake." Mistake. The word felt too soft, too harmless, too forgiving. What he did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A choice to hide, to lie, to pretend. A choice to let me walk blind into something I never asked for. "Was it her?" I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. His silence answered for him. My stomach twisted. I had suspected the presence of someone else. Someone who had already taken pieces of him long before I realized anything was missing. But hearing it in his silence felt like another cut layered on top of the first. He finally looked at me, his eyes glossy with guilt. "It's over," he said. "It ended months ago." "Months ago," I repeated softly. The same words the doctor had used. Everything pointed back to that timeline. Every detail circled the same secret he had buried. "And you never thought to tell me. Not then, not now, not even today." He stepped closer, but I stepped back. He reached for me, but I couldn't let him touch me. His hands used to feel familiar. Now they felt like strangers. "I love you," he whispered. The words landed like stones. Love doesn't hide truths that leave scars. Love doesn't wait for a doctor's voice to do what your own should have. I turned my face away. "No," I said. "You loved the comfort of my trust. Not me." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maybe he finally realized there were no words strong enough to rebuild what he had broken. Maybe he understood that silence wasn't just something he used. It was now the thing that separated us completely. I walked past him, leaving the papers on the table. Let him face the truth he avoided. Let him sit with the weight he handed to me without warning. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, one thing became painfully clear. This was only the beginning of the unraveling. And the man I once trusted was now the stranger on the other side of the door. The night after our confrontation felt endless. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to him pacing in the living room like a man who finally realized the damage he had caused. Every few minutes, his footsteps stopped, as if he was gathering courage to knock on the door. But he never did, and I didn't want him to. The truth had already built a wall between us, and his silence was the final brick. Morning light crept into the room, soft but unwelcome. I hadn't slept at all, yet my mind felt strangely sharp, like heartbreak had carved a kind of clarity inside me. I got up, washed my face, and stepped into the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with untouched coffee, eyes swollen from a night that probably mirrored my own. When he saw me, he stood up quickly, desperate, hopeful, guilty all at once. "Can we talk?" he murmured. His voice used to comfort me. Now it felt like an echo from a life that no longer existed. "There's nothing left to explain," I said quietly. "There is," he insisted. "You don't know everything." I let out a breath I'd been holding for hours. "I know enough." He rubbed his face, frustrated. "You think I didn't tell you because I didn't care. That's not true. You didn't tell me because you cared about yourself more," I replied. He didn't deny it. His silence was the closest thing to honesty he had given me in months. I grabbed a glass of water, trying to steady myself. But being near him felt suffocating. The weight of his secrets still clung to the air around him. I turned to leave, but he reached out, not to touch me, but to stop me. "There's more," he said, voice cracking. "The doctor wasn't supposed to tell you. I was supposed to." "Months ago," I reminded him, "you had time." He shook his head. "The situation with her wasn't what you think." "I know it was an affair," I whispered. "That's enough." "It wasn't just an affair." He hesitated, then swallowed hard. "It started long before you ever suspected anything." I felt the blood drain from my face. "How long?" He hesitated again, as if the truth could still be softened. "Almost a year." A year. 12 months of lies. 12 months of shared space, shared meals, shared life, while he shared pieces of himself with someone else. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge so tightly my fingers went numb. "Why?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. "What did she give you that I didn't?" He closed his eyes. "It wasn't about that. It started at a time when we were arguing constantly. I felt ignored, and she listened." "And I didn't?" I asked, pain creeping into every word. "You did," he said quickly. "But I didn't see it. I only saw what I wanted." His confession didn't soothe me. It only deepened the wound. I remembered all the nights he came home late, all the times he avoided conversations, all the moments he turned away from my attempts to reach him. Now I understood why. I wasn't losing him gradually. He had already been gone. "I should have ended it before it began," he continued. "But I didn't. And when I found out what she had, I panicked." "What she had," I repeated slowly. "You mean what she passed on to you?" He looked down, ashamed. "Yes." By the time I realized, it was too late. "And you still slept beside me," I said, my voice cracking. "You still kissed me. You still pretended everything was normal, while hiding the one truth that could destroy me." He winced as if each word was a strike. "I was scared you would leave." "I deserved the choice," I replied. "You stole that from me." He opened his mouth but closed it again, unable to defend himself. There was no defense, only the weight of his betrayal hanging between us like a shadow that refused to move. I stepped away from him, needing space, needing air. The kitchen suddenly felt too small for both of us. I picked up my phone and keys without looking at him. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Somewhere you're not," I said. "I need to think." He took a step toward me, but stopped when I raised my hand. "Please," he whispered. "Don't walk away like this." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something painful. I wasn't looking at the man I married. I was looking at the man he had become. And that man was a stranger. "I'm not walking away," I murmured. "I'm stepping out of the lie you kept me in." I walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. He didn't follow. For the first time since the truth shattered my life, I felt something unfamiliar rising in me, not peace, not forgiveness, but strength. The kind of strength that comes from knowing the worst has already happened, and the rest of the story was now mine to decide. The air outside felt colder than it should have, as if the world itself sensed the shift inside me. I walked without direction, letting my feet choose the path my mind couldn't. Every step felt heavy, yet freeing, like each movement peeled away a layer of the life I had been forced to believe in. I didn't know where I was going until I reached the small park near our old apartment, the one we used to visit when things were simple, when love didn't hurt like this. I sat on a bench beneath a leafless tree. The branches stretched over me like jagged fingers, casting thin shadows across the ground. The silence around me was strangely comforting. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could hear myself think without his voice overshadowing mine. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to gather the fragments of myself scattered inside that house. Everything felt unreal. The doctor's words, the papers, his confession, the months of lies, the year of betrayal, and beneath it all, the quiet realization that the man I had built a life with had been living a different story beside me, one I was never invited into. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. His name flashed across the screen, but I let it ring. Then another call, then a text, then another. Apologies, please, explanations. All the words he should have said before the truth shattered everything. I turned the phone face down, refusing to let his panic drag me back into the chaos I had just escaped. Instead, I focused on the ache inside me, allowing myself to feel it fully. Pain has a strange way of carving space for clarity. I needed that clarity more than anything right now. An elderly woman sat on the bench a few feet away. I hadn't noticed her approach, but she gave me a soft, knowing smile, the kind strangers give when they sense something breaking but don't ask why. For a moment, I wanted to pour everything out to her, to let the truth fall from my mouth so I wouldn't have to hold it anymore. But I stayed silent. After a while, she spoke gently. "Hard days pass," she said, "even the heavy ones." I managed a small, tight smile. "Some days feel too heavy to move." She nodded, her gaze distant. "Then you rest, and when you're ready, you move again." Her words settled into me like warmth. She didn't know my story, but somehow she understood the weight I carried. When she stood and walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I looked at my phone again. More messages, more missed calls. I didn't want to read them, but I knew eventually I would have to face him. Not because I wanted to fix anything, but because closure sometimes requires confrontation. Not the kind he had given me before with excuses and fear, but the kind I needed, the kind where I spoke and he listened. After almost an hour, I stood up from the bench and began walking back. The sun had already dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. Each step back toward the house felt like walking into the final chapter of a story that had been slowly unraveling for far too long. When I reached the door, I paused. His silhouette was visible through the curtain pacing, just like the night before. I took one last breath and entered. He rushed toward me immediately. "Thank God," he said. I thought. "I'm here to talk," I interrupted. "Not to fix anything." He froze, his words dying in his throat. I walked past him and sat on the couch, the same place where we had shared laughter, arguments, secrets, and now the truth that broke all of it. He sat across from me, hands shaking. "Say what you need to say," he whispered. I looked at him, really looked. His guilt was clear, etched into every part of him. But guilt wasn't the same as change, and sorrow wasn't the same as love. "You hurt me," I said calmly. "Not just by cheating, not just by lying, but by deciding I didn't deserve the truth." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "I need to speak without interruption." He nodded, eyes wet. "You made choices that changed my life without giving me the chance to choose for myself. You tried to protect your image, your comfort, your fear of losing me, but you didn't protect us. You protected the lie." He covered his face with his hands. "I know," he whispered. "I know." "I don't think you do," I said softly. "Because if you did, you would have told me earlier. You would have trusted me with the truth. You would have faced the consequences like a man." He looked devastated. "I made the worst mistake of my life." "You made many," I corrected, "and I suffered for all of them." Silence settled between us, heavy and sharp. Finally, I stood. "I'm not deciding today," I said. "I'm deciding when I'm ready." He looked up, terrified. "Are you leaving?" "For now," I replied. Because being near you feels like standing in the middle of a wound that hasn't stopped bleeding. His breath caught, but he didn't move. I walked toward the door again, this time with steadier steps. As I opened it, I said one final sentence that made him crumble. The truth you hid didn't just break us. It changed who I am. And then I walked out. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Nothing looked the same, nothing sounded the same, and nothing inside me felt familiar anymore. I stayed with a friend for a while, trying to breathe without the weight of his presence filling every corner. She didn't ask too many questions, and I was grateful for that. Sometimes silence is kinder than sympathy. I spent most of my time sitting by the window, watching the world move, while my own life seemed to stand still. The truth had shaken me so deeply that even the simplest routines felt foreign. Eating, sleeping, speaking, everything required effort. He called every day. I didn't answer. Some messages were long, filled with apologies. Some were short, almost desperate. A part of me wanted to delete every trace of him. Another part kept reading each word, not because I believed him, but because I needed to understand how a person could love someone and still hurt them so deliberately. His words didn't heal anything. They only reminded me of how much he had taken from me. One evening, I finally stepped outside alone. The air was cool, and the streets were quiet. My heart felt heavy, but walking helped. It reminded me that life continued, even when everything inside felt shattered. I walked without thinking, and somehow ended up near the clinic where the doctor had first told me the truth. The building stood silently, holding memories I didn't want but couldn't forget. I hesitated, then walked closer. I didn't go inside. I just stood in front of the doors, remembering the moment my world cracked open. I remembered the doctor's gentle tone, the sympathy in his eyes, the shock that rippled through me, and I remembered how quickly everything changed. Standing there again made me realize something important. The truth had broken me, yes, but it had also freed me. I was no longer living inside his silence. I walked back slowly, thinking about what came next. I couldn't stay suspended between two lives forever. I needed clarity. That night, I made a decision. Not about us, not about leaving or staying, but about facing him again with the strength I had been rebuilding piece by piece. Avoidance had served its purpose. Now I needed answers, not excuses. Answers. The next morning, I returned home. When I opened the door, he looked up from the couch, startled. His eyes were tired, as if he hadn't slept either. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. No words, no accusations, just the heavy truth sitting between us. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said quietly. "I came to talk," I replied. "Not to reconcile, to understand." He nodded slowly, almost gratefully. "I'll tell you everything, whatever you want to know." I sat across from him, feeling the weight of the chair beneath me, grounding me. "I want you to start at the beginning," I said. "Not the day you got caught, the day it actually started." He swallowed hard, then began speaking. His voice shook as he described the slow drift, the small lies, the moments he chose her instead of facing the problems in our marriage. I listened without interrupting. Hearing the details hurt, but I forced myself to stay. Pain was unavoidable, but truth was necessary. He explained how the affair continued even when he knew it was wrong. How he hid messages, deleted calls, created gaps in his schedule. How he convinced himself I didn't notice. And then he told me about the moment everything changed, the moment he realized he had brought something back to me. Shame covered his face when he admitted it. "I didn't tell you because I was terrified," he said. "I thought you'd leave. I should have had the chance to decide," I replied softly. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I know." Silence filled the room again. Heavy, sharp, honest. After a while, I stood. "Thank you for the truth," I said, "but I'm still not ready." He took a step toward me but stopped when he saw the distance I maintained. "Will you ever be?" he whispered. "I don't know," I answered truthfully, "but I'm learning something important." He waited, eyes filled with fear. "I'm learning that healing isn't about saving us," I said quietly. "It's about saving myself." His expression broke, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. For the first time, he saw the woman his silence had created stronger, sharper, unwilling to accept anything less than honesty. I walked toward the door again. not in anger, not in fear, but in control. This time, he didn't ask where I was going, and for the first time, I didn't owe him an explanation. The morning light felt different when I woke up, as if the world had shifted slightly while I slept. I lay still for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside the window. It felt strange not to hear his voice, not to feel the familiar rhythm of a shared life, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like space room for me to think, to breathe, to exist, without the weight of his choices pressing against my chest. I made tea and sat by the window, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. Steam curled into the air, soft and slow, like the thoughts drifting through my mind. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the urge to cry. The pain was still there, but it had settled into something quieter, something that no longer controlled every heartbeat. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives gently, like morning light slipping through curtains. I took a deep breath and opened my phone. No missed calls this time. No frantic messages. He had finally stopped reaching out. Maybe he realized I needed distance. Maybe he was scared. Or maybe he simply didn't know what to say anymore. Whatever the reason, the silence gave me room to understand what I truly wanted and what I no longer had the strength to carry. Later that day, I returned home one last time. Not to talk, not to fight, but to end the story properly, with clarity instead of chaos. When I entered, he stood up immediately. He looked thinner, older, like the truth had aged him faster than time ever could. His eyes softened when he saw the envelope in my hand. "What's that?" he asked, voice trembling. "My decision," I said calmly. His throat tightened. "Are you leaving?" "I'm choosing myself," I replied. "You lost the right to choose for me the moment you hid the truth." He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little remained between us. "Can I say something before you go?" I nodded, though my heart felt steady in a way it hadn't for months. He exhaled shakily. "I know, sorry doesn't fix anything. I know I broke something in you that I can't ever repair. But I want you to know, I did love you, even when I was being selfish, even when I lied." His voice cracked. "I loved you, and I'm so ashamed of how I proved it." I listened without interrupting. His words were painful, but they no longer had the power to sway me. I had spent too many nights drowning in his silence. I wasn't going to drown in his regret, too. "I believe you loved me," I said gently. "Just not enough to be honest. Not enough to protect me the way I protected you." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "If there's anything you need, money, help, support, anything." "I need peace," I whispered, "and I won't find it here." He broke then. Not in anger, not in denial, but in quiet devastation. His shoulders slumped, and he sank into the nearest chair, burying his face in his palms. I felt a flicker of the woman. I used to be the one who would rush to comfort him, even when he was the reason I was hurting. But she wasn't in charge anymore. I had become someone new, someone stronger. I placed the envelope on the table. "Inside are my terms," I said softly. "Fair, clear, honest. Everything we should have been." He looked up, eyes red. "I'll respect whatever you choose." "I know," I said, "because you don't have any lies left to hide behind." The honesty in that moment was raw, real, final. I walked through the house slowly, absorbing the last fragments of the life we built. The framed photos, the worn-out couch, the kitchen where we once danced on quiet nights. Every corner held a memory, but none of them held a future anymore. And that realization didn't hurt the way it used to. When I reached the door, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will you ever forgive me?" I paused, hand on the knob. Forgiveness had always felt like a mountain I could never climb. But now, standing on the other side of truth, I understood it differently. "One day," I said. "Not for you, for me." He nodded, tears falling silently. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt cool and clean, like a new beginning waiting patiently for me to claim it. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The chapter had closed, not with rage, but with clarity. As I walked away, the weight on my shoulders grew lighter. Not because the past disappeared, but because I had finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine. His lies, his guilt, his choices. They no longer belonged to me. My story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning, and this time, every truth in it would be mine.